Christian resurgence? Gen Z is reversing a decades-long trend of a declining number of people in the U.S. identifying as Christian, with Gen Z men in particular being more likely to regularly attend religious services than millennials and even some younger Gen Xers, according to a 2024 analysis by political scientist Ryan Burge at the University of Illinois. The shift in men's religious affiliation was one of the big reasons I felt compelled to sit down with Richard Reeves, who is the founding president of the American Institute of Boys and Men, which uses evidence-based research to understand all the unique challenges facing boys and men. His research indicates that what's driving many young men back to the church is a desire for discipline and structure in their lives, something that being part of a religious community can provide to them. Why are so many Gen Z men in particular flocking to religion right now?
I think that young men are searching for structure and meaning and purpose. And maybe for some formation, like some moral formation. That sounds like a really old-fashioned word. But if you think about all the influencers online saying you should work out this way or have a cold plunge or this is your morning routine or whatever, all of those are, they're a demand for discipline in a way. They're a demand for structure. They're saying, tell me how to be in the world. And I think that hunger for an answer to the question among young men of how should I be in the world is to some extent being answered by religion, because that does provide you with community structure, purpose, meaning. And so I interpret it as an expression of a real hunger among young men to, in a way, I think it's about finding your place in the world. It's about finding some solid ground to stand on, and that could come about in different ways. But I think some young men are trying to find that in religion now, a sense of themselves, just by going to those institutions.
And what kind of religion? Are we talking about like Orthodox, Christianity, Catholicism? What are you seeing?
The evidence I've seen suggests that it's the more traditional religion. So it is Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, etc., which are they're very structured. They haven't changed very much. I was actually at a Latin Mass at a Roman Catholic cathedral quite recently. So it's almost 2 hours, mostly in Latin, a lot of it standing, and it was full of young men. And I was really struck by that. And I've spoken to some of the young men there and at other churches, and it confirms my suspicion that this is largely not politically driven. It's more a sense of identity. It's more a sense of like wanting to belong, wanting structure, wanting somewhere to go, maybe wanting somewhere where you're welcomed to some extent. But it's interesting to me that it does seem to be those more traditional religions, or the more demanding religions almost, that are attracting more men. It's almost like they want it to be quite hard. They want it to be quite old. They want it to be real. They want it to be authentic. And so you go to those really old religions, very traditional. And so in some ways, I think that because so many of our other traditions have fallen away around men, right? Traditions of being a breadwinner, traditions of being head of the household. And to be clear, good news, because that's largely because of the rise of women. But if you're a young man today and you're looking for traditions to attach yourself to, maybe religion offers that in a way that some of the other things don't anymore. We're seeing that young men are a little bit more religious now than young women, which is, it's a small gap, but nonetheless it's striking because it never goes that way around. Historically, it's typically been women who are more religious than men. And so the stereotype is, if you see a guy in church, his wife or girlfriend's brought him there. Whereas now you're seeing these churches filling up with men who are going on their own or going with their friends. And so the turn to religiosity is a little bit stronger among young men than among young women.
When did you start seeing that turn with more young men turning to religion?
Just in the last few years. So this
Why
is
do you
really,
think that is?
really recent.
You think COVID may have played a role?
COVID definitely, so young men are a little bit more socially isolated than young women. That's a problem generally. Isolation and loneliness are a problem generally, but young men are a little bit more likely to be isolated, and COVID definitely added to that. So what, in some ways I think about is there have been various phases where you've seen a lot of men going online, you've seen a lot of young men become quite isolated, and now I think some of them are coming out of that a little bit. So here's the positive interpretation. They're starting to realize themselves that they need to do more, to connect, to get out, to find structure and purpose. And so I think what's happening is that young men are themselves coming to realize that there's something missing in their lives that no one else is going to provide for them. They're going to have to go find it for themselves. In the past, your role was kind of defined for you. There aren't enough trad wives to go around to put it bluntly, right? There just aren't. So one of the things I always say to young men, if they are leaning very conservative, they're saying, well, I want a woman who just wants to kind of do what I say and stay at home and raise kids and, grow carrots or whatever. I'm like, well, good luck with that, because there's a few of them on TikTok, but there aren't very many in the real world. Women quite rightly are taking their place in the labor market. Women are quite rightly asserting their economic independence. And if you want a romantic future, you better get used to that idea rather than hearkening to the past. And so at their worst, some of the religious institutions can act as a false call that we can somehow go backwards. And whether they say it explicitly or not, what they're sometimes saying is, and for that to happen, we need men to become more economically dominant over women again. And women need to know their place. And that is morally wrong, theologically flawed, and incredibly bad advice to a young man today.
What about just seeking certainty in an uncertain, chaotic world? How much do you think that plays into it as well?
The really traditional and highly structured religions don't ask as much of you as an individual other than that you just come and participate.
And bear through a 2-hour Latin service.
It's
standing.
just do it. And I think in some ways, I do think that's quite appealing to a lot of young men, because the question a lot of them are asking is not how should I feel, it's what should I do. They're looking for a to-do list. And I think honestly one of the problems with our contemporary culture, and here I'll put more of the blame on the progressive left, has been to provide a very long list of don'ts to young men. Don't mansplain, don't be toxic, don't take up too much space, etc. But not very many do's. And so we've ended up with a situation where there's a lot more don'ts than there are do's. And I think there's a real hunger among a lot of young men for someone to help them, or an institution to show them what to do rather than how to feel. And I think that might be one of the reasons why these traditional religions are doing well.
And if you want to watch any of our previous segments with Richard Reeves on some of these unique challenges facing boys and men, you can go to my social media at Pamela Brown CNN, or visit the Situation Room page on our CNN website.